Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the George S. and Dolores Story Eccles Foundation and the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund.
Welcome to the Hinckley Report, where we bring together journalists, elected officials, and thought leaders from across the state to discuss the most pressing political issues affecting Utahns. Good evening, and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry, director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, we have Jennifer Napier-Pierce, editor of the Salt Lake Tribune, Boyd Matheson, president of the Sutherland Institute, and Max Roth, political reporter with Fox 13 News. Glad to have you all here on a special edition of the Hinckley Report as we discuss the election that just occurred in the state of Utah and across the country. Some interesting results. Let's start with the 3rd Congressional District because we now have those results. Jennifer, first, let's go to you. John Curtis walks away with this thing with almost exactly what the polls thought at 59%. Was there any surprise really in this election?
No, I think if you tracked the messaging, if you looked at the polling that went throughout the race, there weren't a lot of surprises here. I think, there was sort of this idea, well, will Jim Bennett be a wild card? Mm-hmm. And he really wasn't. He stayed about 6 to 9%, and that's where he ended up at the polls.
And what do you think about that, Boyd? This was the new party, right? He's going to come out and bring some common sense back to the state. Third party movement. Is there such a thing? Can there be such a thing in Utah?
I think there can, but I don't think this was the right window for it to happen. You really have to have kind of all the stars line up for a third party to really play, and this wasn't it. You had John Curtis, who was more traditional Republican, not an extremist by any sense of the imagination. It was a pretty balanced race. I do think it was also a challenge, too, because it was a short window. And while it allowed Dr. Allen to spend a lot of money, she had more money than Democrats will probably ever have in the 3rd Congressional, and she spent it all in a very short window, but still didn't move, as Jennifer said, none of the needles moved for the Democrats or for the third-party candidates. Uh-huh.
Was it just a matter of time? Was there something he could have done, you think, that would have got more? I mean, 9%, does that give him something to think about for 2018?
I don't think it's a good sign for them. They really didn't get traction anywhere. I don't think it's dead by any sense of the imagination, because I think there'll be other opportunities. The Republican Party in Utah is still struggling, very divided. So I still think there's a window there for them to play, but they definitely didn't capitalize this time.
Well, they would need to make a splash. I mean, if they were going to have an effect, and when they rolled this out and decided, hey, we're going to participate in this election, then they said they were going to have a big announcement, and we're all thinking, okay, who have they gotten to join their party? And the announcement is, joining my party is me. It was Jim Bennett, who was also one of the co-organizers of the party. And so, if they could draw another big name, then possibly they could have an impact, but it didn't work this time.
And I do think that there were parallels between Curtis and Bennett's platforms. Mm-hmm. There wasn't enough distinction. Mm-hmm. I think a third party really has to have a constituency that's not being addressed. And so, if the plan was to draw from Republicans, I just don't think that John Curtis was extreme enough where Bennett could get traction on that side. And then, of course, Democrats are always at a disadvantage in Utah.
You know what I think, though, is the most interesting about this race is the geographic breakdown in how the counties voted. John Curtis won every county except Grant County, but they almost tied in the Salt Lake County areas of the 3rd Congressional District. It was 16,000 something to 16,000 something, just a couple hundred votes separating the two candidates. And so Kathy Allen performed strongly in her area. But it was 5-1 in Utah County, 5-1 for John Curtis compared to Allen. And that is just something that Democrats can't overcome. And really what they need to think about running against, if they want to really have a congressional impact, is this guy named Jerry Mander. I think, because what's happened is, I know. It's because essentially what we seem to have gotten to in our congressional districts is we have 2 representatives from Utah County, 1 from Davis County, and 1 from Box Elder County, and Salt Lake County, that has well over 1/3 of the population of Utah, does not have a representative in Congress.
Yeah.
I also think that Kathy Allen doubled down on a progressive message, which I don't think really resonated with constituents in the 3rd District. They've never really shown that sort of strain. And you do see the split in Utah Democrats where some are so strident. They want that progressive agenda. They embrace it with everything they've got. And then you've got some mainstream ones. Kathy was on the left side of that and just never got some traction.
Yeah, never got there.
Well, we'll talk about that for a second, because when she entered the race, she was going to be running against someone else, against Jason Chaffetz. Would that have played better, do you think, if Jason Chaffetz was the candidate she was running against, or would it have been the same no matter who was on the other side?
Ooh, I don't know.
I think it ends up fairly much the same in the end, and it shows that you really can't run against someone in Utah. It doesn't play out in the end. You have to be for something. And as Jennifer said, she doubled down on a very progressive agenda, and it just wasn't enough to be what's for. I think the one thing that's going to be really interesting going forward is the millennials. The millennials are going to continue to be a bigger percentage. I think it'll be almost 60% by next round. And neither the Democrats or the Republicans are giving them a good reason to be a card-carrying Democrat or Republican. So I do think there's still space for a third party, but nobody's playing the right messaging to the millennials at this point.
A generational shift. It could be interesting. I think we're going to see a McAdams love race in the next election, and it will be interesting to see how that plays out. Ben McAdams will have some name recognition. He will have some strength in the Salt Lake County areas, and that has been a much more competitive district.
Yeah. So I guess we will get to test the Democrat strategy a little bit in that race, maybe even more than this one. Let's talk about the strategy going forward on getting John Curtis in place. All right, Boyd, I know that you did some research into this. We have been without a representative in that district for 6 months.
That's right.
6 months now, and they're tackling some pretty big issues in D.C. Health care, tax reform, things we care about in the state. How are they going to expedite the process to get our representative in?
So it looks like they're working on an agreement. Normally you would have to wait until the full canvassing was done and full certification, which usually takes several weeks. I understand because the margin was so significant that I think they're working something out where he could be in as early as Monday next week and actually be sworn in, which I think is really important, both for the immediate issues of the day. Tax reform obviously is on the plate back there, and there's some big things that will impact Utahns in particular. And so he's going to have to hit the ground running, and that transition from campaigning to governing, and also looking at another campaign, he's got to go right back into cycle.
It's a great point. Let's talk about that. How is he going to do this? You got a year, and that's about how much time it takes to find your parking spot and restrooms in D.C., right? And he's got to run again.
And he's, you look at his resume, and he's been a business leader, he's been a mayor. Now he's going to be one of 435 people. He's going to be the lowest rung on that ladder, the newest guy for a year. That's not going to be an easy adjustment.
Well, he's going to be out fundraising, right? The fundraising started yesterday when he got the votes, and I just feel like it's going to be more campaigning than governing at this point.
Go ahead, Boyd.
And I think the other challenge too, to Max's point, that there's a big difference between executive leadership and legislative leadership. Very different from being a mayor or a business executive. I always say the most frustrated people in the Congress are former governors and former business people because they actually do stuff. And this is different. Being one of 435 is tough. Finding your voice, finding your way to navigate those kinds of things, at the same time running a campaign. He has a tall order moving through the next 12 months.
For one moment, tell us what you predict for 2018. Are we going to see the same three people?
In this race? No, I think that Kathy Allen took a bruising. I wouldn't suspect that she would give it another try. Jim Bennett will be there in some capacity. I don't know if it'll be in a congressional race or if it'll be some other office, but I get the sense he's not going away. This was more of a stepping stone, establishing a presence in the political spectrum, and he'll try to build on that.
The national focus is going to be on the 4th district. They're going to see that as a swing district. They're going to see that they have a strong candidate who could potentially challenge Mia Love in that district, and so the money is going to flow in there. It's going to be, the Democrats always have a challenge recruiting people in the 3rd district, and it could be again.
That's right. All the money, all the oxygen is going to be in the Love McAdams race for sure.
There is another potential group that we'll talk about who is on the ballot or not. The Republican Party met again this week on the Count My Vote initiative, whether or not they should continue with the lawsuits. Someone give us an idea of where that's going to go, and why have they turned once again.
Oh, man.
Trying to figure that out is like trying to smell the color 7.
I know.
You know, my wife is a psychologist. Do you want me to give her a call? I think, yeah, I'm not sure how to figure that one out.
Look, I think that John Curtis is sort of the poster child for Count My Vote. He did not make it through convention. And so if you want another way to get on the ballot, you're going to support Count My Vote.
Okay, we'll watch that one closely. If it was not for the special election on the 3rd Congressional District, we'd just be talking about local races. So let's talk about a couple of those for just a moment. Let's go through a couple of these mayor's races. Jennifer, Provo.
Provo, first woman, hooray!
Right.
Yeah,
That's right.
great. Michelle Kafusi came out on top, run a tight ship against an incumbent city council member who also sits on the UTA board. I think that a lot of people were watching that race, but inevitably a woman was going to emerge at the top, and so that's sort of an inspiration for women candidates across the state.
Well, as you mentioned,
that's a really important one because we did pick up a couple other women mayor races in Cedar Hills and Taylorsville was the other one. Also some city council things, and it's interesting. You know, women who do run win at the same rate that men do, but it's that decision to get in. And so I'm hopeful that these races last night and this week will really kind of propel that forward, that people say, yeah, I can get in. Because when women get in, they do win, and they govern in a really great way.
And they seem to do better at the local government level.
They're jumping in with good resumes too, with these local government resumes. When you look at Provo, you had one person who's been on the city council for a long time, isn't currently, but was, and then you had Kafusi, who's been on the Provo school board, and so that kind of local involvement, it's really, I mean, it's a good thing that they're building, we're building up leadership there.
Yeah. And it shows where the focus should be for the country. There's a Pew Research study out this week that said 81% of Americans believe they can still grasp the American dream. So even despite all the dysfunction that's happening in Washington, it's these local things, and these local races matter because that's what's going to impact your kids that are going to school. It's going to impact your local community. And so while our national politics may have failed, America won't fail, and it's because of these local races, and it's great to see more people getting involved and engaged in the local.
And Kafusi is kind of royalty down there. Her husband is on the coaching staff at BYU. Hopefully they can pull out some wins, and he'll have job security, so there's not some family turmoil there. And then and her son Bronson plays for the Ravens, and her daughter was a big athletic standout. So finally, mom's getting some attention after all that.
You may have found a way to get BYU a win this week. That's
I'm a U guy, so that is not anything I've ever tried to do. But hey,
that's true, and it is such a great point too. In Provo, this is the first time a woman had even filed to run in Provo in 2017, and she has won, and that's a good sign. We want more people to be coming. Let's go to a couple of these races as well now. Mayor Tom Dolan, the mayor of Sandy, going for his 7th term. That's a long time in one of these positions, but it looks like he may be not going to be in the seat anymore. Tell us what happened in that race.
Well, I live in Sandy, and in the last 4 years, I'm not aware of Sandy having transitioned into some kind of apocalyptic hellscape. I don't think there was anything that in Sandy that necessarily caused this dramatic flip. But 4 years ago, Tom Dolan won by exactly the same margin that he just lost by. And it's a big margin. It's something like 62 to 37% or something like that. And so what I think, Salt Lake County, and especially the southern end of Salt Lake County, is really a swing area, the southeast end of Salt Lake County. And so I think this is part of the national mood. I think that you have this institution in Tom Dolan, and I think people who voted in Sandy, and they had pretty good turnout, 38%, were thinking, I don't feel good about politics, I want something different.
First elected in 1994, so that's been a good run. Do you think this is a sign of some discontent for people that were there for a long time?
I think there's just a difference in message. I know that his competitor was very high on broadening it, but beyond development, which has been Tom Dolan's mantra for years and years and years. And he said, there are other things going on in this city. There are other issues that we should be paying attention to. And so a shift in focus, maybe generational, I'm not sure, but I do think that there's peril with incumbency this year.
And I do think people are getting to the point where they recognize that no one is irreplaceable. And when we think of that, I mean, you go all the way back to Washington. I'm not replaceable, so I'm going to term limit myself. And so I think people do get a sense of that. And I do think it's part of this sense that, we don't have to look to an individual, that we can do it at the community level. And so I think there is a little bit of an underlying message there that even with the economy, Utah's got a great economy going, we have great civil society, and so we're not dependent on having this, political person as the political savior for us. It's just not how we think, and so I think you'll see more of that kind of turnover.
Do you think that plays at all into the polling numbers on Senator Orrin Hatch? Utahns
anti-incumbency.
Yeah, the anti-incumbency message.
Yeah, I think it's and fatigue. I think there's definitely
big.
fatigue. It's just like, oh well, he's been there for a long time.
Okay, someone who's not been there for a long time but has generated a lot of news was the Mayor Draper, Troy Walker, who looks like he may take this one. Talk about what happened there, Jennifer.
He came out and said, "Welcome, homeless people. Come to our community," when there was a huge dispute over where to build a new shelter. And the community rose up and said, no, we do not agree with you. And in fact, it got a little ugly. But it looks like he's emerged as the victor. I'm not sure how he did that.
Tell us how this happened.
I think part of it, his challenger also had some baggage. She sits on the city council and had some controversies of her own. So I do think that there were two people with some issues, and people thought, well, Troy's got a proven track record. We're going to stick with him.
Yeah, and I don't think people are. I think the more we talk about homelessness, the more we address the issues, I think the more kind of the sting of that is getting pulled out. I think one of the things we have to do as a state and as communities, we have to get comfortable having uncomfortable conversations. And I think he let out in doing that. I think he's being rewarded for that to a degree, that say, yeah, we may have not shown our better angels at that moment, at that town hall, but we are a compassionate people. We do know we need to address some of these issues head on, and that's leadership. That's what we need.
Yeah, I think, there's a difference between between that kind of reaction, that visceral reaction, and what may actually be the broad public opinion. That's what I was really wondering about that Draper race, because there's no polling in any of these local races that's public, and so what's going to happen there? You have this mayor who clearly he faced this huge town hall with people shouting at him for inviting this homeless resource center in. But Boyd, you said it. I think there are probably people who were sitting back and thinking, you know what? He tried something. He tried something, and he got bitten because of it. But they respected it.
Max brings up a great point, and often we allow these loud, angry, strident voices at both ends of whatever the issue is to actually prevent us from having the conversation that would actually solve the problem. And again, I think that's part of what we saw out there in that race.
Let's transition to the part of the ballot that many were watching in their own school districts. 6 school districts put bonds on the ballot. What happened? Who fared well? Who didn't?
We had 4 districts who succeeded in getting those bonds passed. 2 did not. I think the message for voters really is, my kid's school is crumbling. They can see the evidence of how a bond could make a huge difference. And, we all know that construction prices are right where they need to be for optimal bond issuing. And so I think the voters just saw through, said, you know what, I'm willing to pay a few extra dollars so my kids, my community, can have a world-class facility.
The 2 districts that failed, Ogden and South Summit, those were the 2. So let me ask, people go into the ballot box, and sometimes when there's a tax on the line, they tell people they're supportive and then they vote against it. Is this different than that when it's a bond for what Jennifer just said? My school district, how does that change, Boyd?
Yeah, local. If it's local, they're much more trusting, and they have much more confidence that this money will get spent right. It'll get spent at this school on this particular project. The higher up you go, the deeper you go into government, the less trust people have, and the less likely they have confidence that the money's going to be spent in a way that will impact their kids and their community.
The Granite District, that bond, the district was open and saying this is going to increase your taxes if you vote for it, and it passed anyway. In Ogden, they said this is going to be tax neutral. And it did not pass. I'm an Ogden born guy. Ogden's my hometown, and that is it concerns me, the state of the school district there. When you look at every time the SAGE scores come in, everything else, Ogden suffers more than any major school district in the state. And so bond wasn't approved. Whether there are other things at play there, whether they want to restore historic buildings at a higher price or just build new things. There are other things in place there, but I think the whole state should be aware that Ogden needs help with their school district.
So what do you think the problem was then? If you have some ties there as well?
Well, it is, there are people who are skeptical of the district, not as trusting, in part because the schools have suffered some. But I think also there was I went to kindergarten at Polk Elementary School, and Polk was one of the schools that was up as a part of this bond. And there was controversy over whether to refix this grand facade that they have there, like we have done with some of our state buildings. There's some real treasures of old buildings in Ogden, and that's one of them, some would say. So do they do that, or do they rebuild? And that played big in the Standard Examiner down there, and could have played into this.
Okay. As we look to 2018, we have to maybe look a little bit at what happened on the East Coast and other states in the election yesterday.
Utah is the center of the universe. Let's not forget that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for clarifying.
We're the bellwether. Of course we are, of all good things. But some of the press was reporting yesterday this was a big night for Democrats. I saw the headlines. Is that true, Boyd? Was it a big night for Democrats? What do we make of a couple of the victories? And if you can walk us through a couple, and then we'll discuss them.
Sure. The messaging matters, and the Democrats are really trying to parlay this into some kind of momentum. I don't think there were no needles really moved, other than perhaps the Virginia legislature that I think
Okay, let's
is
talk
part
about
of
that for a
it.
second, because that one did move, right?
It did.
Yeah.
What happened there, Max?
Well, what did we decide they're called? It's a strange name for their legislature. The
House of Delegates.
House of
The
Delegates.
House of
Sounds very
Delegates.
nice.
Yes, that's their lower house, and they needed 20-some slots to flip, delegates to flip, in order for Democrats to wrestle control of that, and they gained that, and no one was predicting that was going to happen. Some interesting individual stories there. The fiance of the reporter who was shot and killed while she was on air a couple of years ago in Virginia, he ran for the state house and won. And then I think the nation's first transgender state legislator just won in Virginia as well. But yeah, that's these state legislatures. The other thing is that's where Republicans have really been impressive nationally, is winning state legislatures. And so for Democrats to flip that, they also, with a small race, won the Washington State Senate. That's a big deal.
Okay,
But I don't think the Democrats can claim a victory in New Jersey. Chris Christie, he had baggage. I mean,
Ultimate albatross.
he did. He had a lot of going on. So if a Democrat did not win there, that would have been a story, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll bypass Jersey on this one. Maybe not a signal, but what about Virginia?
Yeah, I don't see this big blue wave that I think they're trying to manufacture it into. I do think it's going to be an interesting in 2018 who really gets an agenda that's moving people forward. The country is exhausted. And a little exasperated, I think, in terms of the current occupant of the White House, and I'm not sure it's still playing down to the local level. They're still looking and saying, okay, well, I know this person, or I trust this person. So it is getting back to the local
what's
stuff.
interesting in the polling, though, in Virginia is that Northam and Gillespie, the Democrat and Republican, Gillespie, while he didn't embrace Trump and bring him in, and Trump was very clear to point that out in a tweet.
Very early
Hey,
from Asia.
he did not embrace me, and yeah, it's too bad he lost. But he did run with ads about Confederate monuments. He ran with ads about sitting or kneeling in the national anthem at NFL games in those last 2 weeks. And the polls show that as the voters who decided late in those final 2 weeks decided for Northam and not Gillespie, that those tactics did not work.
While we're talking about Trump, can we bring it home? I mean, what role did Trump play in the Curtis Allen race? I mean, Curtis did everything that he could to be as neutral as possible. He didn't embrace Trump, but he also didn't say this guy's, Satan.
Yeah.
So it was not a strong condemnation, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, and I think you're going to see more of that. I think you're going to see the emergence in Congress on the national level.
Yeah.
I call them the balls and strikes brigade. And they're going to go in, and when the president's right on a policy, they'll be with him, they'll be there. But they won't hesitate to call him out on other things. And they won't be hesitant to call out their own Republican Party leadership or Democratic leadership. And that's good for the country. I mean, for all the exasperation we've gotten from President Trump, he may be the one that actually gets us to become a little more transactional in terms of policy, not just the relationship of politics, because that's what has really mired down. When we talk about gridlock in Congress, it's because of the relationships of politics and politicians. If we can look at a policy and make a transaction, we agree on this, I'm voting on this way, and it's okay to be a little more transactional that way. That could be really good for the country.
You know, and I think the third congressional district is never going to be a bellwether because you know, like Utah County, 5-1 in favor of the Republican. Right. It's just that's not going to change anytime soon. So, but I do see the anti-incumbency, and again, I go back to Sandy, and I think voters went to the polls and were thinking change. I think it's an anti-incumbency thing, and I'd be worried if I were an incumbent.
Yeah. Do you think Trump was on the mind of the voters in these states as they went in Virginia? Were they thinking about him, or was it kind of what Boyd was talking about?
Oh, how can Trump not be on everyone's mind? I mean, he's ever present.
He's everywhere.
He's everywhere. I guess I would say that who is going to stand up to Trump in a productive way? Maybe that's what translated with Curtis, because he wasn't strongly allied, and he did say these are the distinctions between my policies and Trump. I don't know.
That even came up in a debate, right? In the last comment.
Yeah, I was just going to say in Maine, they voted to expand Medicaid, and I think that is a signal. You have the Maine Senator Susan Collins has been one of those voices in the Republican Party against Trump, and that just got strengthened.
It did. Thank you very much for your analysis of this important election. We have to make sure people keep showing up.
Thank you.
That's it for tonight's show. The conversation continues online at kued.org/Hinckley Report. We'll see you next week. Thank you and good night.